Welcome to Survivor Voices Show with me, your hostess, Vennie Kocsis. I am the author of Cult Child and other publications which you can explore on my website, VennieKocsis.com. That is VennieKocsis.com. Survivor Voices Show is dedicated to providing a platform for trauma survivors to tell our stories in a safe space. Each show will bring you a plethora of topics from authors to artists, survivors living with impairments, healing journeys, updated news, and real, raw, vulnerable moments of laughter and sometimes tears. Find me on Twitter using hashtag Survivor Voices. Connect with me on Facebook at Survivor Voices Show page. Join our Facebook group, Survivor Voices, where you will find support and be embraced as you share your life. Thank you for being here. And now, here is our show. Glori Stiner Williams is the founder of Move Forward, a cause dedicated to educating the public as well as supporting ex-members of Sam Fife's Move of God cult. She is a second-generation survivor and speaks candidly about her experiences of abuse, ultimate triumph, and her goals for the future. Glori, thank you so much for joining me today. I know that you grew up in Sam Fife's Move of God cult, and it's been a very difficult journey for you. So I'm honored that you're here to share your story. So I just wanted to really just give you the floor and let you share whatever you want to.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I grew up in Sam Fife's Move of God cult. I was born in 1988 into a group in Canton, Ohio. My parents had joined the move back in the 1960s or possibly early 70s whenever my dad met a man at his work who was in the move and was having meetings, like church meetings in his home. Mm-hmm. And so he had invited my dad to those church meetings and slowly kind of started reeling my parents in, and it was only a matter of a year or two and they were fully immersed in this cult, going to church, 2-3 times a week. They weren't living on a cult compound yet. They were still part of what they call the city bodies for a long time until 1992 was when they first joined a commune setting. But we lived in Canton, Ohio until I was 4. And then we moved to Sapa Christian Center in Alaska, Kenny Lake, Alaska. And I lived there until I was 18. And then 3 days after my high school graduation, I moved to Wasilla. And I was part of that group for about 6 months. And then I was part of a group in Florida, where John Henson is, in Immokalee, Florida, for about 6 months. And then eventually moved to Delta Junction, Alaska, and was part of one of the groups there for a couple of years. So that's kind of the quick overview of my experience in this cult as far as locations. Mm-hmm. As far as, kind of my concerns or the things that stand out to me about this group, I guess the doctrine is it's very, very abusive. It really promotes a lot of child abuse and even degradation of women. And it was founded in the 1960s by Sam Fife, which I know a lot of people that are familiar with this cult know about him. He owned an airplane called Eagle's Wings, and he would fly that airplane all over the world. And so for that reason, he founded groups in about 30 countries around the world that are all part of this Sam Fife Move of God cult. And I believe they're in about 20 U.S. states still to this day. as well as those other 30 countries. So very widespread. A lot of his doctrine was based on this, what he called foundational truth, that children are born with a beast nature, and you have to beat that beast nature out of them. And the words that he used were, you have to beat and you have to whip children and whip and beat that beast nature out of them in order for them to attain salvation. So he did not believe that a salvation experience was possible without beating and whipping this beast nature out of children. So also another part of his message that I believe really contributes to the child abuse factor is he preached the perfection message, as he called it, where he believed that our goal in life should be to try to be like God and try to be perfect like he believed God was perfect. And so they've really forced that on you from birth.
Right.
And we all know that, humans are not perfect, and children definitely are not perfect. That's part of growth, is making mistakes as you grow older and learning from those mistakes, but that was not acceptable in the move of God. So if you made a mistake, it was, simple mistake, like, kids are gonna spill their milk on the table. That was a big deal because that was not perfect. And so a lot of pressure is put on children at a very young age to try to be perfect. And that is obviously not healthy for a child. And so it stresses you out from a very young age. You're constantly afraid that you're going to breathe wrong or look at someone wrong or just any little thing. You don't, you don't want to get beat. So you're trying to do what they want you to do.
Just to put it out there for the audience, this is the same cult that I grew up in as well. So you and I have had a lot of conversations and have a lot in common. The abuses in this cult are really atrocious. It's based on that doctrine, the whole ideal that a child's ego must be stripped of them through pain, through torture. And that's the only way to break them, is quite a sick doctrine to enact on a child.
Yeah, it is. And it does so much damage. It, like I said, it just really, it stresses you out. It creates, I believe, a lot of health problems later in life as well. And the abuse, like you said, is very horrific.
Yeah.
It is not unusual for a child to have been raped and or molested in these cult settings.
And just so everybody understands about why, the doctrine of pedophilia, can you touch on that? The belief about pedophiles inside of this cult.
Yes. So the move has become aware of many instances of pedophilia going on in their groups and on their compounds. And their belief is that, that man or that woman just needs to be delivered from this demon of lust or whatever demon they're putting, whatever name they're putting to that demon. And so instead of turning them over to the police,
right.
And a lot of these cult leaders they were actually ordained reverends before coming into the move. So they actually are mandated reporters. And instead of reporting and getting these people into jail where they belong, they actually kind of send them around to other groups. So, word got out that Mr. Smith is, molesting little girls. We need to ship him down to our sister cult in California.
Sounds like the Catholic Church.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And just, it feels a lot like they're hiding what's going on rather than exposing it in a healthy manner and, getting the victims some help, making sure that that behavior is not tolerated. They don't do any of that. They just allow it to continue. And the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to be shipped off to California or Florida to get some deliverance, as they call it, from this demon of lust or whatever they want to call it.
Right. Yeah, that happened with my sister. the dynamic was she was the whore of Babylon, and the man, he was weak. He let himself be seduced. And this is a, almost 50-year-old man and a teenager. So that was the whole, when you were talking earlier about the patriarchal mindset when it comes to women and the degradation of women, that it looks like that. I mean, even down to small young girls, 4 or 5 or 6, who are told they're sensual, being too sensual.
Right. And some of their rules that they make, because they're all about their rules and regulations that you have to follow, they're very legalistic. And a lot of their rules are for children and women. The men really don't have a whole lot of rules, but a lot of them apply to the way that women and young girls dress, and the way that, their hair is done, and all those kind of things about their appearance and their behavior. And I remember when I was a young child, I believe I was in elementary school for sure, so I want to say probably around 9 or 10, I was approached by a male elder at Seifa, where I lived at the time, and I was told that I was not allowed to come to the main building, which they called the tabernacle, where we had all of our meals and church services together as a big group, that I wasn't allowed to come to the tabernacle with wet hair, because that was a sexual statement that I was making.
What?
And I remember feeling so confused, because I could not, for one thing, we weren't really allowed to talk about sex or anything like that, so that kind of went over my head anyway, but I couldn't correlate, okay, what is the connection between my hair being wet, me coming to dinner with wet hair, because I just worked in the garden all day and I didn't want to come to dinner with dirt all over me, so I took a shower.
Can you correlate it now?
Couldn't figure out what that had to do with anything, and no, I still
me neither.
Have no idea.
That's beyond me. Logic. Yeah. It's almost like, did they get on you about things that they fantasized about? You know what I mean?
That's what I feel like. That's actually what I said when I was discussing this with someone the other day, was I feel like they were just kind of outing themselves, kind of outing their kinks or their fantasies by the rules that they were making.
That's interesting. And sick.
Yes.
So your family was in Canton until you were 4, and then you end up, is that Seifa North?
Yeah, Seifa North in Alaska.
What was that like? So you're like, what, 5 years old?
Yeah, I was 4 when we got there. It was very different, because in Ohio we had our own home. We went to church services, Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday. The rest of the time, my older siblings went to the cult school in Canton. I wasn't old enough for that yet, so I was just home with my mom, or would go to work with my dad. He was a general contractor, and sometimes I would go to work with him. So you go from that to moving on to a cult compound that is very different than how it was in Canton. So it was definitely a big adjustment for me. I was put into a preschool setting all day and didn't really see my parents that much except for at meals.
Okay. Did you sit with them at meals, or did you sit with the other kids?
They had families sit together at Seifa. I know some groups didn't, but Seifa, at least at that point, was having families sit together, and it would usually be our family and then a couple of like single older adults, or sometimes a couple or two. So there'd be about 10 people at our table. And everything was controlled. I mean, down to the seating list for who sat with you at your table. That was done by the leader's wife, so she was an elder, and she would post it on one of the front tables once a month, and that's who you were stuck with all month at the table.
Wow.
And then if you wanted to leave the compound, you had to check out a vehicle, and that had to be approved by the elders. So nobody could just freely just come and go.
What kind of reasons would you be leaving for?
Some, once or twice a year, we'd go into Anchorage and do like our shopping for the school year, get a few clothes and things like that. Or people would sometimes go and, a family member would fly into Anchorage but didn't really want to come to the cult compound. So they would go into Anchorage to see their family member for a few days. It really wasn't that frequent that we would leave the compound.
How did you live? Were the families like, I know when I was on the land, we eventually got our own cabin. Did you have your own cabin, or were you how they are now on Whitestone in that communal, 4 or 5 families to a house thing?
We had our own log cabin. For a long time, it was just our family in that cabin. And then as we have a big family, there's 12 of us kids in the family. So as people graduated and left home, there were rooms available in our home. So then they started moving in a couple of older single adults. At one point, we had 16-year-old twins living with us. So from time to time, for every couple years, that would kind of change a little bit who was living in our house with us.
Did they send teenagers there? I've never asked you this. Were there teenagers there that parents had sent there? Or did,
yes.
Yeah.
There always was 1 or 2 every school year that were there without their parents attending school. We had one guy, actually 2 guys, they were cousins, come from Switzerland to stay there from the cult group in Switzerland. That's part of the move. We had the twins that I was talking about that stayed with us. They came from West Virginia for several years until they graduated high school. And then we had a girl from the Huna group, Huna Alaska group, come and stay for her senior year. We had a girl from Canada, from Fort St. John area. And a lot of these kids, in fact, I think all of these kids, their parents were elders. So it's interesting to me, a lot of the elders were sending their kids to SEPA, and they would come visit periodically, but not all that often. Maybe twice in a year they would come see how their kids were doing. And quite often those kids were put in homes that were run by elders. So elder and his wife would be, living in this home with their family, and these young people would be put in their home with them, which was always a more strict setting when it was an elder's home. Right.
So, I don't know how comfortable you are talking about abuses. I'm pretty open about what I endured as a kid. Whatever you want to share what life was like on a trauma level, being in that environment.
Okay. So, by the time we moved to SEPA when I was 4, I had already been sexually molested once. And it was not by a cult member, and it was not on cult property, but it was at a woman's house that my mom took me to. My mom cleaned her home. So my mom walked in on it happening, and the whole drive home to our house, she kept telling me that we were not going to tell my dad and that I should be ashamed of myself. I was 3 years old when this happened.
Wow.
So I share that because that kind of sets the foundation for, from a very young age, it being put back on me, it being my fault, is what I was told. And so, and mind you, we were part of the cult during this time, so the way that they were dressing me, they couldn't even, a lot of times when you get older in this cult, they blame the sexual abuse on how you dress.
It sounds like the mindset was already set into your mother.
It was, and it was interesting because she actually told me that it was partly because of how I was dressed, and I remember thinking that didn't make any sense to me.
Because she dressed you.
Right, she dressed me, yeah. And they always dressed us in turtlenecks and long skirts. So I didn't understand, what she was even talking about. Like, I remember being upset, thinking it's not my fault, but at the same time, also not really understanding what had happened. And so we moved to SEPA the year after that. And the next time that something happened sexually to me that was abusive was when I was, I believe I was 8. I was either 7 or 8. I think I was 8. And it was actually by the grandson of the man who started the cult, so Sam Fife's grandson. And he was, 14 or so at the time, and he ended up raping me, and that was I felt very confused because he told me my older brother had passed away shortly before that, the summer before this happened. And I remember him telling me as I was struggling to get away from him that my brother would want me to just calm down and let him do whatever he wanted to me.
Oh my gosh.
I remember thinking that doesn't make sense because my brother Mark, who passed away, he drowned in the Tonsina River in 1995. I knew he was my protector. He was the one who would come to the rescue when my parents were arguing and he could tell things were about to get violent. You know, someone was about to get hit. One of us kids was about to get hit. He would take me and my younger brother and take us to his cabin across the whole compound and taught me how to play chess and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. When he passed away, there was no one to, you know, be that protector. And so I remember thinking, no, he wouldn't want this because, you know, he was the one that always kept me safe. And so I was struggling, but he had his hand over my mouth and, you know, I could make no noise. We were playing hide and go seek. So as far as everyone else knew, I was hiding, waiting to be found. They had no idea this was happening. And so finally, when he decided to let me go, I ran home and I didn't tell anyone for a while. And then I told one of the 16-year-old girls who was staying in our home, and she told me, you know, you need to tell your mom or I'm going to have to, because that's like really terrible and that shouldn't have happened to you. And so that night when I was going to bed, my mom came to check on me and I told her, and she was like, well, you should be ashamed of yourself. She said that phrase again to me. And I remember thinking, okay, that's what you said to me when I was 3 too, and this happened. I remember that conversation. And so I just didn't really say much. And again, she said, you know, we're not going to talk to your dad about this. We don't talk to men about sexual things. So we're not going to talk to your dad about this, but you should be ashamed of yourself. And you need to stay with one of your sisters all the time.
Like, basically, that's your fault because you played hide and seek. If you hadn't been out there playing hide and seek in those woods and made yourself susceptible to these young boys, then you wouldn't have got raped.
That's exactly how it came across to me, yes.
I get it.
And so then I just was like, okay, so when this happens, again, I'm just not going to say anything because I don't want to get yelled at. You know, no kid wants to get yelled at. So they kind of condition you to just keep these things to yourself because you either keep it to yourself and life goes on and seemingly nobody knows what's going on with you, or you tell them and you get yelled at.
Right.
And they treat you differently. And so the boys...
They really do. It's funny. They treat you like you're tainted.
Right, they do. They treat you differently. Even your own parent treat you differently. And so the next day, I believe that 16-year-old girl said something to the boy who did this to me, because the next day he came up to me and he threatened me. He said, you know, if you tell anyone, I'm going to hurt you. And so I just walked away from him. I was scared of him. He was a lot bigger than me. I walked away from him. And he, a few days later, said it again. If you tell anybody, I'm going to hurt you. And I was that kid who wasn't very compliant. And usually I had no problem speaking up. So by that point, my courage had kind of returned a bit. Yeah. And I said to him, well, I already told my mom and I already told this girl who lives in our house. So he got really angry, but our conversation was interrupted. You weren't really encouraged to talk to boys. You know, that was kind of a big no-no. So
right.
My dad saw me talking to him and came and whisked me away. So a few days later, we were out on a walk with one of my friends' moms, and we were walking, and he comes along on his bike, and he sees us, and he speeds up, and he hits into me full force with his bike, and I go flying.
What?
So I land on the gravel, and to this day, I have a gigantic scar on my knee from where the gravel actually took out a chunk of my knee, and this lady was horrified because she had no idea what was going on. I mean, it's horrifying.
Did he try to pretend it was an accident, or was it very apparent that it was a blatant act?
It was a blatant act, and it was obvious, but he did try to be like, oh, I'm sorry, oops.
Oh, wow.
But she was like, no, that was not an accident. So she took him by his ear to his parents' house. And she was like, hey, this is what just happened. So his parents sent him over to my house. By that point, I was home. She brought me home and told my parents what happened. I was home, and he came over and told my parents, oh, so sorry. I was sent over here to apologize for hitting into your daughter. Didn't mean to. Just, I don't know. I didn't see her. So I remember my dad being upset, but he was completely in the dark. He had no idea.
Right. And how did your mom act?
I don't remember. I know she was there, but I do not have any memory of anything. All I remember is because we had to haul all of our water, and there was no running water. Mm-hmm. It was very unusual to be allowed to take a bath. Like, that was considered, like, pampering.
Yeah,
like, that didn't happen. But it stands out in my memory because my dad drew me a bath. So I know, and I remember him being upset. I remember him telling Abel, you stay away from my daughter. And so I took a bath, and I remember thinking, well, at least my dad kind of has my back, but also knowing that he didn't know what was going on and that I wasn't allowed to tell him. And I remember him putting iodine, he always used iodine, on my knee and how much it hurt, and putting a bandage on it. And that's really all I remember. I don't remember my mom saying anything or doing anything.
That was the general culture in regards to child rape, sexuality. It's funny, you know, those games of hide and seek, they let you play them, but, you know, that's where some of the worst sexual acts happened in those games. Because I remember that type of stuff too, you know, playing it in the clothing bank, happening upon even teenagers making out, right? You don't know how to process that. You're like, whoa, sin, you know? But yes, I also, you know, encountered cruelty, and that's horrible. You know, this is the trauma of the move that you had to deal with. How long were you at SEPA? What took you moving around into different compounds like you did?
Well, I told them when I was 17 and at SEPA, I was going into my senior year, I fell in love with this boy who was 21. And he was his family lived in the town of Kenny Lake. And kind of, you know, they would come shop at our greenhouses and kind of affiliate a little bit. His mom was friends with one of the women there. Well, he ended up being interested in SEPA and deciding he wanted to move there. So he moved out of his parents' home onto the compound. Well, after several months of knowing him and going to the youth functions and him being there and stuff, I ended up falling in love with him. And my parents, I knew that would not be okay, because we were always told, you don't know what love is yet. Don't tell us you're in love. You don't talk to boys. It was just very taboo. And if you want to, you know, get to know a boy, there's this process you have to go through where you have to try to do this year courtship where there's no touching and all of this stuff. And you have
walking out a year.
Right, walking out a year. They would always say there has to be a Bible between you. In other words, they wanted 6 inches between you. They didn't want you touching. You had to sit on your couch cushion if you were sitting on the couch. Like, very restrictive. So there was a process. And
or a chaperone.
Little box, you know.
Did you have chaperones too sometimes?
Oh, always. You never went anywhere with the boy by yourself ever.
Without a chaperone, yeah.
Right. And so, anyway, I didn't fit into their nice little neat box. I never really did as a kid. And so I was afraid that they would know. So we were kind of note passing and stuff like that. We'd hide notes for each other in the tabernacle. And, you know, we knew where our spot was. Well, my sister intercepted a note, so it got back to my parents. So my parents started questioning us, and he cracked. I mean, he cracked fast. He was like, oh, yeah, you know, we've held hands and we've kissed. Oh, well, that was like the end of the world.
You were a whore of Babylon again.
Yes, I was like this terrible, terrible person who was basically, my dad pretty much called me a slut without using that word.
Right.
So I was put basically on house arrest where I could not leave my home without either one of my parents or my older sister who was an adult and lived at SEPA too.
What happened to him?
Nothing. He was talked to by the elder whose home he was living in, and he was told, stay away from me, don't talk to me. He was told that I was really bad influence and bad news, not the kind of girl he wanted to be with.
Wow.
And so he did what they said for a while. So then after a while, we started passing notes again because, you know, you just can't, when you're attracted to somebody.
Love is love, yeah.
So, and kids, I mean, you say don't talk to them, they're going to talk to them more. And so that's kind of how it went with us. Well, when that all went down, I told my parents, I said, this is ridiculous. I don't want to live here. I had been telling them since I was like 10 years old.
How old were you at this point? How old were you?
I was 17 at the point where all this happened.
Okay.
I was going into my senior year of high school. And I had been telling them since I was 10, I don't want to be here. I don't want to live here. When I graduate, I'm out of here. My dad would always say, when you're 18, you can do what you want. And I was like, great, I'm out of here. So I was on house arrest all my whole senior year.
What?
Well, I turned 18 at the beginning of April, and on the day that I turned 18, I started packing all my stuff. And I came downstairs with a couple suitcases, and my dad's like, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I don't know, but I'm leaving. I'm 18, and I'm not going to be stuck in the house all the time. This is crazy." So he's like, "Okay, we'll take you off house arrest. You're not grounded anymore. You're not on house arrest anymore, but please just stay. You're only 1 month from graduating." Okay, fine. So I stayed, and they were pretty like walking on eggshells around me that last month.
Love bombing you a little bit.
Right. They were treating me better. They let me go pretty much where I wanted to go as far as youth functions and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I left, went into Wasilla because I had a brother that lived in Wasilla. And so I went and stayed with him for a little while and got a job, my first real job, non-cult job. And
what was that like?
I'm sorry?
What was that like, that first job you had that was put you in a situation where you were around non-cult people?
It was exciting. I was excited about it.
Uh-huh.
But I remember thinking, wow, this is so much easier than the work I did as a kid. Because we were always told, you'll it's important you have a good work ethic. And they worked us so long, such long hours and such tiring work.
Yeah.
And then I went to Fred Meyer's and got a job there. And it was like, oh, this is like nothing. I'm cashier, talk to people, help them find stuff.
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, I got a job there and stuff. Well, I lived in Wasilla for about 6 months. During the time I was there, my brother decided to move into the cult building because there's a cult in Wasilla, which he currently is the leader of. And at the time, he wasn't an elder yet. He was just highly respected in the cult, and they wanted him to kind of keep an eye on the building. So he and his family moved into the upstairs of the building. Well, there was another apartment up there, so I shared an apartment with his mother-in-law. Well, after a while, there was just a lot of things that I noticed they tried to, restrict my, friendships and who I was dating, and his wife started making things up about me and saying that, crazy things. And so I was like, you know what, I can't be here anymore. So I moved out and was living with a friend from work. Well, during that time, I ended up getting raped and getting pregnant. And my family, their solution was, just send her down to Immokalee, Florida, to John Henson so he can deliver these, demons of, blood or whatever out of her. Because, of course, it was all my fault. And so they sent me down there. So that's how I got down to Florida. And Florida was really, you would think that when you turn 18, the cult would treat you a little differently. Like maybe you'd have a little more freedom, stuff like that. But no, they were still grounding and spanking adults at this place.
That is insane.
And they would dump ice water on us if we did not get out of bed right when they said. They would beat
What year is this? What year? I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Give me a year. What year is this? If you can remember.
I went down there December 28th of 2006, and I was there until I believe it was August 3rd of 2007.
Damn. That's not that long ago.
And I remember one time there was this lady, she was a nurse, and so she worked night shifts. So she would come home and go to bed at about 7 in the morning. She had been working all day. Well, she lived in the same big trailer I did with all the girls lived in this trailer with John and Bambi Henson. So she was told by Bambi Henson to get out of bed and come join us for breakfast. Well, she had just gone to bed an hour before. She's like, no, I'm not coming out. I'm not going. I'm going to sleep. Leave me alone. So Bambi sent me in there to tell her again. And I was between a rock and a hard spot. I knew it was crazy, but I had to listen. So I went in there and I told her, hey, Vicki, Bambi wants you to come out. She was like, no, you tell her I'm sleeping. She needs to just leave me alone. I worked all night. Okay, so I went and told Bambi. Bambi gave me and this high school girl baseball bats. And she said, I want you to pound on the walls, on her bedroom walls, until she comes out.
Wow.
So we did. And I remember thinking, because I really liked this lady. She was very kind to me. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, man, I don't want to do this at all. but I know if I don't really know what they're going to do to me. They're probably going to scream at me for hours in what they called a fire meeting, which was like an elders meeting. So I just did it. I just went with it. And she finally came out and had breakfast with us, because you can't sleep when someone's pounding on your walls. So that was, that's an example of the kind of things that they would do. They were a deliverance farm, so that means they lay hands on you, speak in tongues over you, and try to cast out demons that they think that you have.
Talk to me about the heat. You told me a story about what it was like in the summer down there. How they worked you in that extreme heat.
Yes, there were times when people would get heat stroke because in fact, the man that I ended up marrying, I was married to him for a while. I remember him coming in one time and them having him lay under the ceiling fan, lay on the floor under the ceiling fan, and start slowly sipping some water, because he got heat stroke because they had him out there putting siding on a building all day and only gave him like very brief breaks for meals. Wow. And that was not unusual. I saw that happen several times when men were out working in the cornfield or doing carpentry outside or outside milking cows and things like that. I worked pretty much nonstop when I was there. They told me that the more I broke the rules, the more they were going to keep me busy, because that was their solution. Break you. So, right. So they had me. A lot of what I did was cooking, or I would help a lot with what they call their taping ministry. So all morning, when you're there, all morning you're in class with John Henson, and he's telling you all these things. Autism is a demon. You have to spank it out of your children. All these crazy things. So you sit there all morning and you hear his stories about demons, and you listen to Donald Barnhouse tapes, and you listen to Sam Fife tapes, because that's all they play down there. And then you have lunch, and then after lunch you're on work schedule until dinner. Well, they would record John Henson talking all morning, and they would send out these cassette tapes and CDs to whoever ordered them, whoever wanted to pay money to listen to him. So I would be stuck writing labels for hours of what date, who talked, what the title of the talk was, and recording these CDs. So I did that a lot when I was there. I lucked out because I had a lot of indoor jobs, but that was not normal. It was because they knew I had helped my dad with his taping ministry at Safebuds in high school, and so they knew I knew how to run the equipment.
Who were the consumers? Who did you find were buying those the most?
Mostly people from the move, just all over in different groups. They'd be like, "Oh, we need John Henson's truth," and so they would just order them. And they would order like the entire series. So whatever he would go through this series with us 3 times in a year. So every 4 months. So they would order the whole 4-month series. So that was a lot of tapes and a lot of label making.
I think they do a lot of, because that's the same kind of system they had. And we're talking a 50-year span here. Where they would it's almost like an affirmation game. See, the same message is being preached at this compound by this part of our Father ministry. God is speaking the same message through all of us.
Right. Yep. And John Henson was always kind of looked down on because he preached that once you're saved, you're always saved. So he preached what they called the once saved, always saved message, where he said, God's grace saves you, and no matter what you do from that point on, you're saved. You'll still go to heaven when you die. Whereas Buddy Cobb was preaching Jeopardy message is what we called it, where, be in fear and trembling for your salvation, because if you look at me wrong, you're going to hell, kind of thing. And so they were always at each other's throats about this. And so what was interesting to me was that John Henson was very open about it. He would say, and Buddy and I don't agree on this, and he would badmouth Buddy Cobb. And that would be all on tape, and people would be ordering those tapes. So that was always very interesting to me. It was like he did not care. He was just going to say, what he thought. So there was always this contention. And so for that reason, hardly anybody came to Florida. Like usually the traveling ministry and Father ministry, they travel around a lot, different groups. But we really didn't get that there because they didn't like John Henson because of his message.
So Buddy Cobb definitely held his power because he came into power after Sam Fife died in 79. They shunned, and then my other question about John Henson is do you think part of that shunning also had to do with that rape accusation, or do you think it was they didn't care about that?
Well, so he was accused of kidnapping and raping and doing all kinds of things to this woman named Charlene Hill in the 1970s, and he was convicted. And then the Supreme Court he appealed it to the Supreme Court in Mississippi, and they overturned it on a technicality, from what I've read. So, anyways, I don't think the cult across the board very consistently, everyone in the cult has told me, oh, he never did that. But of course they're going to say he didn't do that. They don't want you to know what they're doing. And so they always stood up for him and said, oh, God vindicated him in the end, he won his appeal.
Right.
And that was always something that, was said. So I don't think it had anything to do with that. I think it was just...
he wasn't complying enough.
And we want to look good to Buddy Cobb, and so we're not going to go visit. We're not going to preach at his group. However, John Henson is still to this day a father ministry and still welcome in their pulpit at conventions. So it was kind of a weird thing. I only ever remember one person coming through, and that was Dan Riccadelli, and he's a traveling ministry. He's the only one I ever remember coming through while I was there in that 8 months.
And so what prompted you to leave?
So I met the man that I eventually married and divorced while I was there, and he was an elder's son, and he lived in Delta with his parents, and he was down there doing what they called Niagara credit for a felony. And so basically you go down there and you do, you listen to preaching and you do your community service hours down in while you're on third-party custody, and then you come back to Alaska and
okay,
you don't
wait a minute.
jail time.
I need to
So
stop
it's something
you.
that they used to do.
I need to understand something here. Sorry.
Okay.
So this is a part of his actual sentence with the court?
Yes.
And part of that sentence has to do with this religious establishment?
Yes, because they call it a treatment center, even though it is not a treatment center for drugs and alcohol. That's what they call it. And so if you have like a DUI felony or something, they don't do this anymore. But it was called Niagara Credit, which was the name of the man who came up with the idea. And the state of Alaska used to do it. I believe they quit doing it in either 2007 or 2008. But it was very common, and that's how John Henson's group got a lot of people from Alaska, because they just kept getting, you would have this option, and your attorney would encourage you to take it because it's better than sitting in jail, was kind of the thought. And so, he was down there doing this Niagara credit, and he was going to return to Delta. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to go now. Go to Delta, find a job, stay with your parents. His mom had come down and met me and said, hey, come on up and live with us. So that's what took me to Delta. And in Delta, we had a little more freedom because we didn't walk out of gear. We just got married. We didn't seek confirming words or do any of that craziness that most people have to go through. The group that we were part of in Delta was called the Delta House, and it was not a cult compound. It was just what they call a body house.
A body house, yeah. More in the city.
Right. It was in the city, and you're able to have a normal job and stuff like that. So that's what we did. We didn't want to be, there's 4 other groups in Delta that are cult compounds. We didn't want to be on those. So we lived there in the city and stuff. And then we ended up, after almost 5 years, I said, you know what, this is crazy. This is not for me anymore. They were kind of pushing us toward ministry, towards leadership. And I was like, I don't want to be a leader. They had me leading worship like every single church service. And after a while, I was like, you know what, this is not for me. And so I ended up telling my husband at the time, hey, I'm leaving Delta. If you want to come with me, cool. If not, cool, whatever. But I'm leaving. This is not for me. I don't like it here. So we moved into Fairbanks, and we never looked back. We never rejoined.
Wow.
And I got a job with the state of Alaska, and I think that kind of made them leave me alone because they are very paranoid about the government. The government is, going to make us all, they're going to kill everyone who's Christians, and
Yeah.
they're gonna, they believe that we're all gonna become martyrs.
Yeah, but you know what? They taught us that about the government, but yet they don't have any problem taking federal funds from the Denali Commission from the government.
Yes, it's very interesting. They're full of contradictions.
Yes.
And that's definitely one of them. Yeah, they do benefit from a lot of grants from the state of Alaska for their agriculture stuff. And I believe Whitestone got some grants for things like their fuel tank setup and their, rescue squad setup that they have and things like that. They definitely don't mind taking money from the government. They had to make us kids be fearful of the government, because what would have happened if we had picked up the phone and called the troopers and said, hey, I'm getting beaten and raped here. Could you please come rescue me? So they don't want that. Or us calling, Office of Children's Services in Alaska and saying, hey, I need to be protected. My parents are doing this.
Or even to give you the idea that you had any type of option to have any power at all.
Right, and I never knew OCS existed until I was 18, and I found out about it from a coworker.
Wow.
She was like, why didn't you ever involve OCS? Why? When I was telling her about my childhood, and I said, what is OCS? So they try to keep that very, hidden from you, to know your options. Also, the other thing that worked hand in hand with that was the fact that we did have a trooper that attended church at SEPA every Sunday and sometimes on Wednesdays with his wife and children. And he sat at the dinner table with our family, and he saw us be abused, and he did nothing.
Yeah.
So that also made me believe, okay, well, there must not be any law against what they're doing. As a kid, I didn't really realize that what they were doing was illegal or wrong.
But then you got out in the real world, and you rescued your brother.
Right. So I left the move. We moved into Fairbanks July of 2011, and I lived in here for a couple of years, and then in January of 2013, my husband at the time and I went to visit my family at SEPA, and they always kind of shun you, like, oh, we're going to smile at you and say hi, but we're going to keep it civil, but we're not going to, really talk to you while you're here. It was always very awkward visiting.
You apostate, you.
Right, and so I always was respectful of the rules when I went there. I always made sure I wore a skirt and, tried to be respectful of the way that they lived, even though I thought it wasn't for me. But we went to visit, and we observed my younger brother, who at the time was 21. He has Down syndrome, and he was being drug around the house by his hair because he would not pick up Legos that were under the couch. And my dad was screaming at him, and he was being stood in a corner by a hot wood stove that was glowing red because it was, dead of winter, and they had it stoked up pretty good with wood. And he was maybe 2 feet from that, to the point where he's standing there for hours. I know as a kid, when I was stood by that same hot wood stove in that same spot, because that was the wall where we had to stand in the corner, I know that I passed out a couple of times because it was so hot. So that was, a big safety concern when I saw that happening. Also, he was being spanked with 2x4 that they had in the kitchen above the kitchen door. It was very appalling, and I think the thing that got to me the most of all of it was we were sitting in the living room one night, and we heard my mom giving my brother a bath, and she was, I think she was trying to pop a pimple on his back because he was, upset, didn't want her to do it, was saying no, 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 kind of yelling, kind of like, leave me alone, and he wasn't very verbal, so that's really all he could do to, stand up for himself. And my dad jumped out of his seat. He had been sitting in the living room talking to my husband and I. He jumped out of his seat, ran into the bathroom, and we heard him screaming at Samuel. We heard him banging his head against the tub surround over and over and over and over, and screaming at him, you will listen to your mother, you will listen to your mother, and then holding him down while she popped the zit. So that made me cry. And at that point in my life, the only emotion I really had was anger. I didn't really feel a lot. Either I was like, blah, it was an okay day, or I was angry. That's really the only two feelings I ever had. So for me to cry and feel like a lot of sadness, that was a first for me. I really had never experienced that. And I remember just feeling so overwhelmed and not knowing what to do. And so I came back to Fairbanks. We left a day early because we just could not watch it anymore. There was a couple other things. We were out on a walk with my dad and my brother, and he was shoving him. Walk faster, shoving him. And just shoving him to the point where he was going to fall into the gravel and hurt himself. And so we left because neither one of us wanted to see anymore, and we didn't know what to do. So we left. And I was 23 at the time. Came back to Fairbanks, and I went to work at the public health center, and I told the nurse, one of my nurse friends there, I said, hey, this happened. I don't know what to do to help my brother. Do you have any ideas? And she goes, Laurie, don't you know about Adult Protective Services? And I was like, what is that? And she was like, it's like OCS, but for adults. They protect adults. You need to call them. She's like, you're a mandated reporter. So she sat with me while I called APS, and I reported what had happened. Well, that ended up leading to an 18-month court battle. 4 months into the court battle, they gave me temporary guardianship, and my brother was living with me. And then at the end of the 18 months, they made it permanent. So he's been with me for about 5 years now. But the things that they did to him caused some irreparable damage. I mean, you cannot go through what he went through and not have PTSD.
Right.
You know, I have PTSD as well from what they did to me, and he went through far worse than what I ever went through. So it follows you through life, no matter how much therapy you go to, no matter how much you want to heal, it still follows you.
It does, because it pops up. It pops up in moments that you just really don't expect it. I mean, the only way, at least for me, to learn how to become functional is to try to figure out how to move through those moments. But that whole, just let it go is kind of a joke to me, because it's not how the mind works.
Well, easy for a perpetrator to say, just let it go. Of course they want you to forget and move on.
Right,
That's convenient for them.
Yeah. Yeah. You it's amazing what you've done. It's amazing what you've done for your brother. It's amazing what you've survived. I mean, we're strong and powerful people, and we've come through a lot. You fought hard for your brother. I observed that from a distance. So I hope you pat yourself on the back for that.
Yeah. I often say, if as long as my brother is safe and happy, I've accomplished what I need to in my life.
Yeah.
Anything else is just extra stuff. That's not really as important to me.
So you have, so everyone can know where they can find you. Glori has a Facebook page. It's facebook.com/ and then Move Forward Inc. So I really encourage you to follow that page. You really share some poignant information there. The doctrines that Sam Fife preached. You're very open. It's a great page, and we're going to do a seminar in August, and I hope people will listen and come and learn about this cult, especially the locals. I think that maybe part of the way is to get it to die out. They are intermarrying, it seems, which is kind of alarming, but to not let any new members come in.
Right. I think educating the public is very important. And so that conference will be in Fairbanks, Alaska, August 17th and 18th. And if you go to the Move Forward page, there is an event, and you can kind of follow along there for more information about the venue and the speakers and all of those details.
I think it's really going to be a great seminar. I'm going to come up. I'm going to tell my story. I'm going to talk about writing Cult Child. I enjoy my friendship with you. I really am honored that I know how private you are. So I'm really honored that you came on and shared your story. You're a strong woman, girl. You are.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to share. But I mean, we could probably talk about this all night, right? We could do like a whole nother thing on just the doctrine itself.
Right.
how twisted it was and things like that. And maybe we will do that. But
yeah, we've definitely just scratched the surface tonight.
absolutely.
But I think we hit on some good, important points about the abuse, the doctrine,
Mm-hmm.
Kind of how this whole thing got started, how they tend to lure people in slowly through little home groups. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I mean, I guess the only other thing that I really want to say is I know there's a lot of survivors from the Move of God out there who I know tune in. And I just want to tell you guys that there's a lot of support out there for you.
Yes.
It didn't used to be that way, but in the last couple of years, I know that, Vennie, you have some support groups on
Mm-hmm.
Facebook. You've written your story, Cult Child, and I know that there's my group or my page as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's people out there who have survived this same cult who are here
Yes.
for anyone who wants to or needs, support, wants to talk. We're here and we get it. But, it's not something that you ever completely recover from, and it's important to have that support network there. So
Yeah, one thing we always say is that cult kids understand cult kids the best.
right.
So, well, thank you so much for being here with me today, and I look forward to the next time that we're together.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining me, Vennie Kocsis, and remember, get through it, don't stay in it.